I'm Betty Gaudreau. I live at 565 Commercial Street. And the first time I came here, I was in high school. It was 1960. Came with 3 friends from high school, and one of our friends' parents brought us here. We stayed at Beach Point, and they would let us loose at night, and we would go into Provincetown. We walked around. We loved seeing people riding bikes and the freedom, and we bought earrings that made our ears look like they were pierced because we weren't brave enough to have pierced ears, and we thought we were very cool. Then when I went home, my parents told me that they had come here right after World War II, and they loved the artists that were here, and they listened to jazz here, and they loved it here. So life goes on, and I meet a person who also loved Provincetown, but he had never lived here. And when you pick what you want to do in life, one of the things he wanted to do and I wanted to do was spend a summer in Provincetown. So in 1968, he got out of law school, we were married, we came and worked in Provincetown for the summer. He worked at the Colonial Inn that was owned by the Schmeraldas, and I worked for Del Johnson up at the Governor Prince. We had a great time. We had a house in the back of the Geverline's house on Commercial Street. We had afternoons free, and we worked at night, and then we would go and listen to the jug band when we got off of work about 10 or 11. And so then we tried renting other years, like 1971, 72 in Wellfleet. And that was great. And then we rented in Ciro. But we always loved Provincetown. And we said we can always go to those beaches, but we want to walk and have a cheeseburger at 2 o'clock in the morning. We used to go to the Blase and walk into town and walk home. We bought this house in 1980, and we've tried to keep it as it was, keep it old. The house we bought had been originally owned, I've kind of researched it and asked the neighbors. It was originally owned by John Dos Passos. He lived next door, and he had this as a house for his friends and a guest house. And when he was going back to New York with his wife, they got in a terrible accident, and she lost her life, and I think he lost an eye. He could never come back here. So he sold this house, he sold his house to the Sonnenbergs, and Ben Sonnenberg was his kind of representative or agent for his books. And this house, I've heard, he gave to a man named Flynn. Mr. Flynn sold it to the Rubensteins, who I think, she was English, and I think she did most of the work. If you see the garden, it's a beautiful English garden. They put the wood that you see in here in. They did very clever things to the house to make it really charming. And that room we're sitting in was a fish house. It was added to an old Victorian house, probably in the 20s or teens, and they married very well together, and it's charming, and the floors go up and down, and we love it just the way it is, so we keep it the way it is. We don't modernize it at all. We just, if we have to redo anything, we tell the carpenters to do it exactly as it was, because we're trying to preserve a look that happened then, that today there are beautiful houses, but they don't have the feel of something of another time and place. This house was then owned at one point by Norman Mailer and his wife Beverly, and they had a lot of great parties here that most other people can tell you about. I was only at one, and I think their children love it, and it was a family house. And then we bought it in 1980, and it's been a family house ever since. My children love this house. We have a house in Boston, and I asked them both one time, I think one was in college and one was in high school, if I had to sell one house, which house should I sell? And they always said, oh, you can live anywhere in Boston, but you can only live in our house in Provincetown. I remember Ciro Cozzi from the summer of 1968. My husband Russ and I were down here. We knew we were going to New York because he was going to be at NYU Graduate Law School. And so we worked here for the summer. And we lived in back of the Geberlein house, right next to Ciro's house. And they had friends, Mel Roman and his wife, who lived on the water side. So we had access to the beach, and we would walk through every day. And there was always a party going on at Mel Roman's. And Ciro and Patty were just these iconic, beautiful people. He was very dark with curly hair and great shape, and Patty had long blonde hair. And they would always party. It looked like something you'd expect to see in Saint-Tropez or Portofino. They would be having great times, and they'd be in the water and out of the water. They were young. And when we came back and lived here, we got to know Ciro as a little older person, and Patty, and they became very good friends. They were as close as they were when we used to see them in '68. They laughed. They loved to have a good time. And because of Grace Consoli and Vico Fabriz, who had worked for both of them, we've had 3 or 4 dinner parties here with Ciro and Patty and Josephine and Sal Del Deo. And one time they had Ciro and Sal's restaurant, but then Sal moved and had his own restaurant in the West End. And they were great Italian cooks, lovers of anything Italy, and were wonderful. There was the joie de vivre, the life that they had was wonderful, and they enjoyed Provincetown, raised children here, and it was great to know them, all of them.